I do appreciate the opportunity to do this, for Mary Ruth to ask me, and this is a topic that I've learned a lot about through doing it since 1974. Let me just give you a little introduction of why I do journal. It wasn't because I decided one day I think I'll start journaling. When I worked in the president's office as the administrative assistant in 1974, Dr. Charles W. Kahn, who's Paul Kahn's father, was the president, and he was an avid journal keeper. I mean, he was the historian of the church. He wrote in his journal every day. Well, he came in 1970, but by 1974, he started sensing that I really wanted to write. So he comes in one day and he says, you know, if you're going to be a writer, you've got to write something every day. And I said, oh, okay. So you need to start keeping a journal. And I thought, me? Why do I need to keep a journal? You know, I got 2 kids and I'm, you know, a husband at that time. And I don't have time to sit down and write in a journal every day. But he didn't let it go. So on some special occasion, Secretary's Week probably, or Christmas or something, he goes out and buys me this really expensive journal. What was Joe Rogers then, and which has cost me a lot of money through the years because I want them all to match. So in 1974, I started keeping a journal. Well, let me just say, he didn't let it go. He would come through the office every now and then. He'd say, well, how's your journal coming? If you know Dr. Kahn, you can imagine. And I'd say, well, it's coming. Maybe I hadn't written in a month. So anyway, when I say I keep a journal, it's because my boss literally made me keep a journal. And he would assign me things to write. And he'd say, I need you to write an article for the Church of God Evangel. And I'd say, me? He'd say, yes, you. And I said, what am I going to write about? He said, just write about a week in the president's office at Lee College. I thought, well, that could be pretty boring. But anyway, I look back now, I found this article. It was really published. Had this cute little picture of me, all young and cute, you know, back then. And when I look back now, I thank Dr. Kahn, and I tell my children that probably one of the most important things I'll leave you will be my journals. And I said, you're going to learn a lot about yourself, so don't get your feelings hurt. You're going to learn about those times, you know, I was upset with you or whatever. So anyway, that's kind of an introduction to how I started on this journey. I learned that there's a big difference in a diary and a journal, because the diary just kind of records what you do, who you see, what you did. But when you really start journaling, it's when you start really reflecting. You write about not only what you did, but for what you see. And I did a little research in the area. Well, actually I did this several years ago because I did a presentation at Stanford University at a writing conference. So you'll notice a lot of my sources are a little bit in the 80s, but that's okay, they're still good. But it talks about the word diary and journal spring from the Latin word die and the French root J-O-U-R, how you say that, Jim? Jour. That's what I thought, but I was afraid I'd do it wrong. Anyway, it means just a day book. It's something that you write in. And they can be used interchangeably. Some people, you know, say I keep a diary, I keep a journal, but to me there is a difference, and I've learned the difference. So what is a journal? Well, it's where we write about what we're thinking about, what's going on around us. How do I feel about what's happening at Lee University right now, or in the political arena, or at Westmore Church, or the whole Church of God, whatever. Whatever is important to me, it's a reflection of what I'm thinking at that particular time. It's really a tool for self-discovery, and I have learned so much about myself, painfully, since 1974, since I started writing in my journal. And you know, when you go back and read your journal, you see, this is where I was then, this is who I was then, this is who I was later, and then now, this is who I am. So you begin to see, hopefully, growth in who you were to who you have become today. It is a place to generate and capture ideas for writing. It's an aid to concentration, and it's a mirror for the soul. Wanda Griffith, my sister, speaks to my business communications classes about once a year, and she comes in and she tells them she's going to take them on a writing journey. She's very creative, she's not like me. But she comes in with her suitcase, she has everything, and she starts pulling out things. And she pulls out this mirror, and she starts fixing her hair and looking. And she said, this mirror is to tell you that everything you write is a reflection of who you are. When my students write a summary of her presentation, that's one of the things they remember most. So it really sticks with me too, because I have learned that it is a mirror. We begin to see things about ourselves that we like, and sometimes we see things we don't like, and it gives us an opportunity to change. One of the things is a good friend and a confidant. You can tell it anything, and there's no one going to get their feelings hurt. My oldest sister, bless her heart, she died a few years ago, but she used to write all the girls, her sisters. There were 5 girls. She'd write us these long letters when she'd get upset about something. And by the time we got the letter, she was calling us to apologize. So I said, we called her sister, and I said, sister, you need a journal. What do I need a journal for? I said, instead of writing those letters, you go write that in your journal. Then you don't have to make these, back then, long distance phone calls and pay money for it. So it is your best confidant. It's your good friend, and no one's going to get their feelings hurt. Okay, it talks about you, your relationships. You can go back and read your journal and just see a pattern of the kinds of relationships you were able to develop, your feelings about things, and in other words, it just reflects who you are, and it is a tool for self-discovery. Another thing, it's a private space of quiet and solitude. Now, some people may write in the morning. I write at night. And let me just say, during these years, I have gone through dry spells. So I have to confess, and I confess this to my students every now and then. Because at the beginning of every semester, I give them a little speech about if they want to be good writers, they have to keep a journal. And if they'll keep one and write at least 3 times a week, then they're going to get some bonus points at the end of the semester. I'm not going to read their journal, and they're not going to read mine, but I'm going to glance at it. And you say, well, what about doing it on the computer? Well, you can do that. I guess that's kind of more like blogging in it today. And you know, some people put things on Facebook, and I think, you need a journal. You need to go write that in your journal. I could care less about when you went to the bathroom or whatever. You see what I mean? So I know it's different today, but there are a lot of things that we put in our journal. I wouldn't put on Facebook. In fact, I don't put much on Facebook. I don't have time for it. But I am on there to keep in touch with my kids and my grandkids. But it is a time for you just to be quiet. And I usually, what I will do, my devotion time is at night. And sometimes I'll have my devotion and then I write in my journal. Sometimes I write in my journal and then I have my devotion. Well, sometimes when I do that, I have to go back and write again. Because when I have my devotion, and I feel like that this scripture is something that God is really speaking to me right now. I don't really know why, but I better write it down. And then later, a few days later, I think, oh yes, that's why I got that scripture in my journal. So whatever works for you. You know, some people keep travel journals. I mean, there are many different, your journal may not be like my journal, but it's who you are. It depends on the kind of person you are. Okay, it's the Sabbath time, a time of rest, to come apart to be with God as Christians and to reflect on His Word, and that's what I just said. It's a channel for many blessings. Okay, it's also a thermometer of your emotional weather. Oh my goodness. It fluctuates sometimes from storms of anxiety to the sunshine of good news and to the tranquility of numbness. Have you ever been to the point you're just literally numb? You're not anxious, you're not happy, but you're just numb. So it fluctuates, and it helps you to go back and see, this is where I was, and this is, but thank goodness I didn't stay there. It can be encouraging when you read a little later and you say, well look, here's where I was here. I was way down here in this valley. But then I was way up here on the mountain, and then you just learn a lot of things about yourself. Okay, it's a vehicle to express your private longings of your heart. You know, like if you're wanting a husband. I quit doing that a long time ago. By the way, those of you who don't know me, I was married. I have 2 children and I have 8 grandchildren. But I've been single for 30 years. And I'm kind of not in the market anymore. Just kidding. But seriously, you know, I used to write things about that. You know, like, oh Lord, are you going to send me this rich man or whatever? But I gave up on that. But anyway, I'm just trying. What?
But your friends have.
But my friend hasn't, for sure. One of them here hasn't forgiven up on that. Anyway, sometimes you write personal things, and your things, one author calls it her conversations with God. You might say things in your prayers. Sometimes I'll write a prayer, and sometimes I'll write a devotional. Sometimes I'll write a poem that I just read, or the words of a song that just spoke to me today. You know, so whatever is touching your life. Remember, you're the main character. So in this story, in our Gateway class this semester, any of you teach Gateway this fall? Yeah, we were trying to help the students to understand you're writing your own story. Well, that's what you're doing in your journal. You're writing your own story. And someday, you may even see some of your story in print. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. So why do we keep a journal? Why do I encourage students to keep a journal? Why do I keep it? To improve your writing, for one thing. As Dr. Kahn said so many times, you have to write something every day to be a good writer. To help in monitoring your goals. I'm a goal setter. And a lot of times at the beginning of the year, I write my goals in my journal. And I go back at the end of the year and I reiterate what I had written, and also the ones I reached and the ones I did not reach. There was a member of our Business Advisory Council several years ago, and she told me that the beginning of every year, she writes a letter to her husband setting goals, and she wants him to make her accountable during the year, but she writes this letter in her journal, and she's pretty brave. So at the end of the year, then she goes back and she talks to him, and you know. So it's a way of being accountable for her goals that she's written. So sometimes we do it to set goals and to set our priorities. And sometimes when you're writing, you'll see, I am getting my priorities out of order here. You will see that very quickly. I'm focusing on my kids too much rather than myself. I had to learn that I was important too, not just my kids. And it helps you to, like I said, self-understanding and evaluation. John Calvin wrote on the first page of his Monumental Institutes, quote, "Without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God," end quote. So a journal is a place where we give expression to the fountain of our heart. And like I said, it can go from emotions, sad emotions, to exhilarating emotions. Okay, how do we use this as an instructional or learning tool in education? Well, there's many ways. You know, I went to that teaching conference last year, and I went to one session. They talked some about journaling and about having students write short things in class. I've done that. But the journal that I have my students to keep in my class, I said, you may write about anything. You don't have to write about this class. I'm not necessarily wanting you to write about this class. If I want to know what you think about this class, I'll have you to write it to me. But this is your personal journal, and I want you to practice putting what's in your heart and in your mind on paper. And I know some of them, they're much more comfortable to sit down at the computer and do it, and I do accept that. And I'm sure you do a lot of things like that in education. So it's a wonderful thing that, you know, sometimes it can be used in that way. That's not why you do it. Let me just say, when you keep a journal, you don't say, I'm keeping a journal because I may write a book someday about this. No, that's not. That may happen, but that's not your goal when your journal is for you. You're writing. And I was reading something this morning in the research I had done. It said that private writing is an excellent prelude to public writing. So that's all we're saying. That's exactly what it's about. So when you're getting your students involved in journal writing, you do it however, whatever you're teaching, whatever is important to you. There's many ways you can do it. But if you can just get them writing. When I look back at my journals in 1974 and I look at what I write today, it's like a different person. Hopefully, you would think, after 30-something years and several degrees. But yes, it does reflect where you are in your writing process. Okay, it also helps in the solution of problems. I have started writing in my journal and I just start spelling out whatever I was dealing with. And you know what? Before the end of the evening, I had solved that problem. It became so clear to me what was going on just because I was able to reflect on it and put it on paper and deal with it. And then move on. Do you see, has anybody ever had, let me just say, are there any of you that are already keeping a journal? Okay. Okay, I've given Karen's my friend here, I've given her many journals through the years. So you do keep a journal?
Not consistently.
Not consistently, but some.
Same here, consistently at times and sometimes not. But
Sometimes not. Well, you know what I do when I miss sometimes, which is, I did the last few weeks, and I thought, ooh, I got to talk about this, so I got to get to writing again. But no, like during the holidays or something when you're out of town, sometimes it's difficult to do that. But what I do then, I said, I cannot believe I have not written in, and I'll put how many days. And then I start talking about why and what's been going on, and I see, I didn't want to write about that. Sorry about that. Do you see? So even then, I kind of recap what's been going on. Mm-hmm. So don't give up. That's what Dr. Kahn used to tell me now. If you miss a few days, you know, no, don't give up. Just keep writing. So anyway, it can help you sometime to solve some problems. Okay, it can improve, according to the research, various aspects of personal health. And I've given you my sources that I've used here. There have been, Bruce was one of the authors that describes research with subjects who wrote thoughtfully and emotionally about traumatic experiences, and most of them generally experienced improved health and growth. So it is definitely therapeutic. I'm just transparent with my students, and I guess that's okay, isn't it, Jim, to be that way? And I tell them that, you know, you'll find I'm very transparent, and sometimes in my devotions, that will be reflected. But I just tell them, you know, I went through some tough times in my life. In 1978, I was in an automobile accident. I didn't walk for 9 months. But you know what happened as a result of those 9 months? This is a lot of what I wrote in my journal. Except the research, which Frances Arrington, when I couldn't walk for 9 months, I called her, said, would you have some of your assistants do some research on the 23rd Psalm and bring it to me? And she shows up at my door with an arm full of books. And so this is where, my point is, I wrote a lot during those 9 months. I had and it's called Climb Up Through Your Valleys, and it's based on Psalm 23, and you know, I won't tell you the whole story, but it gave me a purpose for what I was going through at that particular time. So, that's, sometimes you never know what you write. I know when Dr. Kahn wrote the Church of God history book, Like a Mighty Army, he did a lot of research on journals of A.J. Tomlinson, people like that. You never know when your journal will be used in situations like that. I said, if someone ever writes the history of Lee College, they might want to read some of my journals. They could get some inside information. And most of it would be really good. Yes, Dr. Kahn, it would be very good. So sometimes it is therapeutic. And I remember when after my divorce, Bill Balzano was our counselor then, and he just came out of office one day to ask me how I was doing. You know, he's trying to not act like I needed counseling, but you know, just how's everything going? And we talked a little bit, and he said, well, one of the things you might want to consider do is keeping a journal. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've been doing that long before this happened. So anyway, it is something that it really does help you. It helps you get rid of some of that pent-up anger at times or anxiety or whatever. Okay, another reason you might want to keep a journal is because journaling is biblical. Now, it's not commanded in the scripture, but it is definitely modeled. What if we didn't have all those songs that David wrote? And some of those sound kind of like my journal at times. Oh, Lord, where are you? Whatever, in my distress. So the Bible does contain a lot of examples of God-inspired journals. And so I think it helps us to chart our spiritual progress. It helps in meditation, and it just helps us in remembering the things that God has done in our lives, just remembering His works. And another thing, and I think this one is so important, number 4, it helps preserve a spiritual heritage. It's a very effective way to teach the things of God to our children and to our grandchildren. And my daughter has a desire to write, and she will have all my journals someday and it's going to be a long time, but whenever I go home, Jim said we're not talking about going home yet, but she will have my journals, and I don't know what she will do with those. She may not do anything except read to her children some things that will make them remember their grandmother better or whatever. So it is a way to transmit our faith. When you write something down, it's there. And now when I go back and read things I've written in my journal, I think, did I write that? I don't remember that. That was pretty good. I didn't even remember writing that on that particular day. Well, after my divorce, I kept writing a whole lot, because my daddy died and my husband left the same week. So you talk about a time in my life when I needed something to hold on to. So I wrote a lot in my journal, sometimes more than once a day. Times just in trying to rise above the storms. And this book is the outcome of a lot of journal writing. Well, when my editor was reading this book, which happened at that time to be my sister, Wanda Griffith at Pathway, she was the book editor. She said, you need a subheading, so we added a view from the peak. So at the end of every chapter are excerpts from my journal that went right along with every chapter. And if you'll indulge me, I'm just going to read you one little example. At the end of every chapter, I just kind of went back through my journal and found things that fit. Because while I was writing this book, I was writing in my journal. Do you see what I'm saying? So here's what I wrote one day. It says, a view from the peaks, personal journal. I am in Israel with the President's Council from Lee College. This spirit of Israel is contagious. Regardless of their circumstances, persecution, rejection, and so forth, they do not allow their spirit to be crushed. Neither should we. Today I thought how much we can learn from this. As Israel knows how things will turn out in the end, according to the scriptures, so do we. My spirit and my mind are being renewed. And the Lord knew I needed it. Being in the Holy Land is a constant reminder that the Lord's return is imminent. We do not have time for fretting or worrying about trivial matters. We must be about our Father's business. Visiting the upper room was a time of spiritual commitment and renewal. Our visit to the garden tomb was a time of soul searching. To stand near the place where Jesus rose from the dead was like an injection of new life. As I sat near the garden tomb, I thought of my mother and daddy who, when Christ returns, will rise first to meet him. Walking up and down the hills of Jerusalem today, I pause and thank God that I can walk. In 1988, when I was lying flat on my back with a broken leg and a fractured hip and could not walk for 9 months, I had no idea that a few years later I would be walking the hills of Jerusalem. This trip is a part of, quote, the table he prepared for me in the presence of mine enemies. Psalm 23:5. By enemies, I mean rejection, hurt, and even confusion. As we visited the Dead Sea, our tour guide reminded us that many tourists come to the Dead Sea for renewal of body and spirit. That is why I am here, to be renewed, and I believe it's happening. That's very personal. But the editor, I guess she knew better. She didn't change a word from my journal. So what I'm saying is there are reasons sometimes, I think, where we write certain things, and especially when it comes to our spiritual lives, you know, how we're going to affect others in the future. I do have a lot of experience. When they asked me several years ago to do a presentation at a writers' conference, I thought, well, I've been doing this for years, and I started doing all the research. I thought, well, I know this. This is what I learned. I thought, why didn't I write these books? But my point is, you learn it by doing it. That's exactly what I had done. I learned it before I learned what the research said about it. Like now, I teach a course in managerial communication, and I tell my students, in the president's office, I learned a lot about management, managerial communication, long before I knew what to call it. You know, a lot of the different theories. But anyway, if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to answer them. I will say that it has been a great help in my life to help me to walk through times of difficulty and times of, you know, when my husband left, I set new goals. I moved from a beautiful home to a 2-bedroom apartment. I went back to school 5 summers, a whole year, LSU, got my PhD. So, you know, when you look back, you say, you know, God was directing my steps even through these tough times. You say, well, why did you go to LSU? Well, because my major professor at UTC and I became friends. And when I called her to tell her I was going to start teaching and chairing the business department, she said, well, you've got to come to LSU. She had left and gone to LSU. And you can live with me this summer and it won't cost you a penny, and I'll get you a teaching assistantship. Now, when I look back, you know, my journal reflects all those things that I could never have made them happen. So I guess what I'm saying, it is an encouragement when you're right in the middle of situations in your life, or when you're dealing with difficult students. I know this is more about a personal journal than a professional, but it all works together. Because who I am to my students is a result of what I've written and what I believe about journaling and that sort of thing. So any of you, would you like to share what journaling does for you, or what you've learned through it? Maybe you can give me some new insight. Do you keep a journal, Jim?
No, I don't, but I was going to ask you, because I've tried in the past, and I've usually used travel to kind of jumpstart me.
Travel journals, yeah.
But when I go back and read them, and maybe that's the mistake, is going back and reading them too soon, but they sound so like I'm writing for a journal.
Like you're writing for a journal?
Yeah, they
Well, yes, because you're such a good writer already, probably.
well, I don't know about that, but do you know what I'm saying? How do you keep that, how do you keep it from
Sounding like you're writing a paper.
like you're purposely writing for a
journal.
journal? I mean, you kind of tried phrases and things like that. Well,
Yeah.
I'm writing this at midnight. I guess I'll quit now and go to bed.
No, you can make it more.
But you know what I mean? The prose is different. The prose is different in a journal. And
Yeah, it is. It's
I
very.
think the key part is what
It's
you said is going back and reading it too soon. You haven't let yourself just
Yeah.
dive
Get
into
distance
it
from it.
enough,
Yeah,
perhaps.
I think that could be.
One summer, I spent several days reading my journal for the past 15 years. And that was quite an experience. And this has been years ago. But I wrote down 10 things that I learned when I did this. Number one, I learned it reminded me of the goals I had achieved and those that I hadn't. It also helped me sort out my strengths and my weaknesses. I could see the patterns. It also reminded me that life is not lived on a plateau. It's a combination of mountain and valley experiences. And number 4, it provided favorite scriptures, devotionals of encouragement, and prayers of thanksgiving and petition. And number 5, it helped me to sort out some things in my life and restore some internal order. You know, every now and then we just get confused. Number 6, it was a reminder that I am human with the ability to experience a variety of emotions, anger, happiness, joy, thankfulness, fear, and even depression at times. Not for long times, but short times. Number 7, I was able to see an improvement in my ability to express myself and become more creative. And number 8, I recognized that my journal had forced me to clarify my beliefs on certain issues, some spiritual and some political. Number 9, it was obvious that my journal had become my friend and confidant, especially during those times when I needed someone to hear me out. And number 10, last but not least, it reminded me that God's grace is sufficient in the bad times as well as the good times. Now that's just what I learned that summer. So, but I waited a long time before I went back and read, because those were 15 very turbulent years that I read. But when I finished, I realized I have come a long way since I last wrote at the end of that 15th year. And I mean, I'm not standing up here trying to sound like super spiritual. I am not. I'm just,
Yes, you are.
no, I'm not. I just, I just learned that, when you're in a storm, you don't have to stay there. Yes.
Since you're writing your journal for your children,
Mhm.
wouldn't that cause you to guard what you wrote?
I'm not writing it for my children. That's what I said. They're going to have some rude awakenings. It's not for them.
But, okay, you're writing it and people will read it.
But I'm not guarded at all. I say whatever I think. I really do. It's personal. It is not a journal to be published. But there are things from it that are worth, maybe publishing parts of it at times. I was telling my sister I had lunch with one at lunch. I said, well, I think it's time for me to write again. I've kind of motivated myself during all this. And I told her what I think my next book is going to be. And I'm not telling you because I may change my mind. But I just think it's time. You go through seasons. There's seasons I don't want to write because I'm so bogged down. Now maybe I've been on vacation 2 weeks. When I get back with all these 4 classes and doing a newsletter and all this stuff, I may not feel so motivated to write again. But I might next summer when I'm not teaching. So it's just a new goal that I'm kind of thinking about this year.
I was gonna say, I know you touched on this, but I think one of the biggest benefits I've found is just journaling as a way to preserve personal history. I mean, I'll go back and think, I never would have remembered that. Even things with my children, I never would have remembered that they said that if I had not written that down. So just preserving those things is so good. And also, I think for me personally, writing is just a way that I can come to, just to work through confusion and really find clarity.
Absolutely.
It's so important for me. When I get confused, it's like, I better sit down and write. Because that's the only way I'm personally going to find some clarity and get to the root of problems.
Yeah. And I share that with my students because, these kids come here, they're going through a lot of stuff. And especially, I teach a gateway class in the fall. And I love reading their autobiographies and, their presentations. It's just amazing, isn't it? And it's kind of like reading their journal in a way. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I think you're right. It's a way to bring clarity to wherever you are. And to remind yourself of where you have been and where you are now. And where you may be someday. Or where you would like to be.
I'm still in a personal dilemma. Because you were talking about, you like all your journals to match. And I'm very much like that in a way, but I've gotten to where I'm not really comfortable with a pen anymore. So I want to.
You won't do it on the.
I want to do it on the computer, but then I'm like, how do I preserve this? Because, the fact is, when we do things and it's out there digitally, it's we're not as likely to. It's there on the shelf. I mean, an archivist will tell you it's easier to preserve something in a physical format. Mm-hmm. So I'm just kind of at that place like now. How am I going to really do this? Because I want to get organized and I want to. have my collection in chronological order, so I'm just still trying to
You know, it's
work through that.
and like.
And I think I like, and
Hard
do
copy.
some binding and.
Yeah, you can
know.
do that. You can print it out. And, I know Dr. Kahn, he was, while I worked for him, he started having some of his journals transcribed from his journal, from his written journal. In fact, I did quite a bit of that on the typewriter. Woo. But it makes you tired to think about it. But I learned a lot too by typing some of his journals. I kind of learned how he did it. And when I look back, my minor in my PhD program was journalism. But let me just say, I learned more during those 12 years of working with a man who wrote 8 books during the 12 years he was president. And I typed every one of them at least 3 times on a typewriter. I learned a lot about editing. I learned a lot about writing. I learned a lot about rewriting. I mean, it was like being in journalism school for 12 years. Because that was a big part of what he did. I mean, we did all the presidential work, sure, he did, I helped him. But they used to kid me, because one time I made the mistake in a meeting, we had a president's council that came in and they asked me to speak, and, well, anyway, Dr. Kahn got up and told the president's council that one time I got a little exasperated with him about something. And he said, I said, well, you know, I've only been the secretary for 18 years. It was 18 years at that time. So I've never lived that down. Some of the faculty who were there then still remind me of the, you know. But, you know, it was just, they say, I worked for 4 different presidents. Which one was the best? What did you learn the most from? I learned different things from different presidents. But I learned about writing, mainly. Well, and about how to treat people. I learned a lot of good things from Dr. Kahn. How to treat people, how to write, how to rewrite, how to treat your family. You know, just basic things. And of course I learned from all the others too, in different ways. But when I look back, he was really not only my boss and president, he was my mentor. But I didn't know how to call it that back then. But that's really what he was a mentor. Because he believed I could do things that I didn't think I could. And he would assign me to do it, and I would end up doing it. He'd say, oh yeah, write it, I'll edit it for you. Well, yeah, that's a pretty good privilege right there. Now, the first book, he wrote the foreword, but the second book, Paul Kahn wrote the foreword. So I thought that was pretty neat, too, by the time I wrote the second one. His dad was the president. But I appreciate your comment.